Now, let's say that the lab results come back and you need to understand that. In Utah, there is only one lab that is certified properly to be a legal result. There's a number of other labs outside the state, but there is nothing else inside the state that can actually provide a certified result. Make sure that the result comes back from from this one. It's called ALS Lab, Apple Lion 70. If it doesn't come from ALS and it's within the state, it might not be a valid sort of a result. Now, ALS's report is everything is on one page. They will usually show, for example, if there was 3 samples taken, they will show that there was 300 square centimeters sampled. If maybe there was 4 samples or 2 samples taken, they'll reflect that by saying there was 400 square centimeters or 200 square centimeters. If you just see that there was 100 square centimeters, you'll know that the guy probably didn't know what he was doing, because he only sampled one location, or he reported that he only sampled one location, even though maybe he sampled others. All those are red flags for you to know that perhaps the sampling might not have been done properly. So let's say we've got that result, we've got it in front of us, we're looking at that. About the middle of the page on ALS's report, there will be 3 numbers. 3. The third number is always a 0.1. That number used to be, they call it the RL, the regulatory limit. It used to be what Utah's threshold was for legal decontamination. That number has since changed to 1.0, but ALS isn't just a Utah company. They're national, they're worldwide. So that 0.1 has just become part of the form. Doesn't matter what is happening within the house, that third number will always be a 0.10, and it is meaningless. It has nothing to do with the house at all. We're going to look at the first 2 numbers. Now, of those first 2 numbers, the first one is a total. So if we did 2, 3, 4, no matter how many samples we did inside the home, the first number is going to be the total of all the contamination found on that sample. The second number is going to be that total divided by the number of samples. So let's say, maybe we got a 9 result and we did 3 samples. First number is going to be 9.0. The second number is 9 divided by 3 because we did 3 samples, and so they're going to give you a 3. Maybe use a different set of numbers. If we did 3 samples and we got a 6 total, they're going to take 6 divided by 3, and you've got a 2 reading. Now, different local health departments read that differently. For example, let's say that we did 3 samples, and the first one, the total of all samples is a 1.5. So the 1.5 in many of Utah's counties is greater than 1, therefore that property is contaminated. And we're going to spend a little bit longer on this, but right now we're just looking at the meth form. So the first number is going to be a total of 1.5. The second number is going to be 1.5 divided by 3, which is 0.5. Now 0.5 is the average of the total, and that number is less than the state threshold, which is 1.0. So now we have a problem. You wouldn't think we'd have a problem, but we have a problem. In Salt Lake County and many of the northern Utah counties, they're going to look at that 1.5 and say, we have a total contamination on this sample of 1.5. We are going to assume that that entire contamination level of 1.5 came from one location in the house, one of the 3 locations that was tested. We're going to assume that it was all in one spot and there was none in the other 2 spots, right? So since there was a spot in that house that is contaminated, therefore that spot is contaminated, therefore the entire home is contaminated, and the entire home needs to be decontaminated. Now, if you can follow that logic, you might be a little bit smarter than me, but that is exactly what many of the local health departments in the state do. Is it right or is it proper? You can have that argument all day long with the local health department. They don't care. If, according to their views, it's contaminated, then it's contaminated and it needs to be decontaminated. Now, Utah County and some of the other counties will say, okay, well, you've got a total of 1.5, but we're looking at that second number. The average is 0.5. Therefore, your average house contamination level is less than the state threshold of 1.0. Therefore, you don't have a problem. So you've got the same state laws. Salt Lake County is going to say this home is contaminated. Utah County and some other counties are going to say it's not contaminated, and they're all looking at the same laws. Now, as illogical as Salt Lake's argument may seem, using the second number also has some illogic to it. For example, let's say that we have a total of maybe a 2.9 on the first number. So we're going to get like a 0.97 for the second number. You know that it is not going to be evenly distributed. Yet that 0.97 is assuming that it's evenly distributed, which it is not. And Utah County is going to say, not a problem. Now, a wise person might say, hey, we need to retest and just make sure that we really do have, a 2.9. Obviously, any sampler or remediator will tell you that if you sample, maybe this part of the wall, you will get a number. And then if you move over or up or down or to a different wall, you will get a totally different number. And, that number will be perhaps more, perhaps less than the first sample. And there will be some variation. And, who knows how much variation there may be. Maybe the smoker was against this wall, and maybe you sample that wall. So you've got those sorts of variabilities going. So, I want you to have all this in your mind as you see these results. Because, for example, if you have a number that comes out, maybe a 0.95 on the first number and a 0.31 or 0.32 on the second number, your first inclination, regardless of the county, might be, well, I'm good. And maybe you might not be, especially if they didn't get the HVAC system well, or if they were sampling the wrong kinds of locations, cabinets, tables, floors, whatever. All right, so that is how to read an ALS report. Hey, good news. Recently, the Utah State Legislature has changed the law to make things very simple and across the board, even for everybody. So now every county is going to do this the same way. And the way it is that if an inspector does 3 tests, it has to be less than 3 to be safe. So if he does 2 tests and the result is 2 or less, then he's good. If it's higher than 2, then there's a problem and it needs to be remediated. Now, again, in the previous segment, I mentioned how that also has its illogicness to it, but it makes a little bit more sense than the other interpretation. And now, per state code, every county has to interpret the laws that way, and so there's consistency is from one place to another within the state. I'm going to leave the previous segment in just so that you have that historical perspective. And just in case you run into somebody who says, well, it's this way, 1.1 over 3 samples means that it's contaminated, you can say, yes, it used to be that way, but it's no longer that way anymore in the state of Utah. That's your update.